Hello everyone, and welcome to my story summary for Second Sight. This is one game with bits and pieces of lore scattered around as you explore, and I can never shake the feeling that I've missed something fairly important, so if I gloss over such a thing during the summary, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I should also probably warn you that there is a bit of a flashing lights situation pretty much any time the main character uses his powers, and that'll be sprinkled pretty heavily throughout the video, just about any time I show gameplay. So, let's jump right in, and starting this game off, we assume the role of somebody we know as Patient JV034, which we could assume means there were 33 patients before him unless there's some kind of Patient Zero nonsense, but this isn't a disease we're talking about, so not likely. The brief opening cutscene we see shows him as sedated and being rolled into some kind of lab by a couple of guards, who are referring to him as some kind of psycho killer, not long before they further sedate him into unconsciousness. When we come to, we see our patient is restrained to a bed, and some force quickly undoes those restraints. Our patient JV is wondering and doubting if he somehow freed himself, and he's clearly having some memory issues as he can't recall who he is. He decides to test himself by focusing on the switch to the door outside of the room, keeping him locked inside of the cell. This works, opening the door, confirming to him that he has some kind of telekinetic powers, which he decides to practice for a bit before moving on. As he continues onward, he begins to notice he feels weak, likely the result of having been sedated, and another power springs forth, the ability to heal himself from any injury or ailment, which extends to healing others as well later. Upon leaving this room, our patient encounters some security guards, which he tries to scare off using his newfound powers. He definitely does not kill any of them by accident every single time he tries to do this. Nope, not one time. Before too long, he encounters an interrogation room with which will become quite familiar, though nothing happens here at this point in time. He flees to a nearby elevator where he takes a moment to compose himself, and it's there he notices he's wearing a medical bracelet that says his name, John Vatic. This prompts him to have some kind of episode, causing him to flash back to a moment 6 months before now. We then shift to a less hospitalized Vatic walking into a military base in Germany, then introduce himself to Colonel Joshua Stark. It seems that Vatic was invited here for some vague advisory role, and the first thing the Colonel tells Vatic to do is go get some weapons training. This starts a bit of a tutorial segment, where we meet all the members of Winter Ice with whom Vatic will be working throughout the remainder of the game. We first meet Cortelli, who's the comms expert of Winter Ice, and is apparently really good at the obstacle course on which he starts Vatic to start his training. To finish the obstacle course, Cortelli sends Vatic off to Jackson, aka Tex, the explosives expert, who apparently cracks wise way too much. After the obstacle course, we're sent to the firing range to meet JC, Juan Carlos, the soft-spoken weapons expert. JC takes us back out on the course for more sidearm training, and Vatic definitely does not find a rifle with live rounds in it and subsequently go on a killing spree. Nope, because that would end very badly for him. After this, we meet Franklin, the sniper and reconnaissance expert, who takes us back out to the firing range for sniper rifle training. There is one member of the team we don't meet during training, Ballard, the field medic, who I'm not entirely sure does a whole lot more than just be there during missions. We're now sent to the mission briefing where we learn the whole setting. The important bits are that there's a psychology researcher named Viktor Grienko, who has been involved in potentially dangerous research in psionic phenomena in Siberia for about 50 years since the mid-40s. The mission of our team, the Winter Ice team, is to drop in near a hydrocarb pipeline in Siberia, find Grienko, and learn everything we can about his research. At this point, Vatic chimes in to explain he's a parapsychologist who works to debunk psychic research, prompting him to question why they even want his expertise. The Colonel tells him that their advisor says they may need his expertise, as that advisor walks in. And it's clear she and Vatic have met before, as this is Jane, a mystic, as Vatic describes her, the kind of person Vatic works to debunk. She even, quote-unquote, attacks the works Vatic publishes occasionally. Jane ominously states that Vatic has to join as he's the only one who can save them, and it's at this moment Vatic's vision ends, sending him back to the elevator in the present future. When he comes to, he's clearly remembered who he is and what we just saw, but we'll soon find that he doesn't remember many events beyond that. Upon emerging from this elevator, a guard at a desk pretty quickly notices Vatic, and Vatic tries so hard to explain himself he launches a deadly psi blast at the guard, learning a new power. He uses the guard's terminal to get his bearings, and decides to look for the patient records room to learn what's been done to him. He also gets a reminder that the people he's been killing have, lives and stuff. It's around this time that Vatic learns how big a deal his escape is, as the police are lining up to surround the building, so Vatic needs to sneak out. During his extremely stealthy exploration, Vatic notices he can better avoid detection using his abilities with a sort of charm power. We also encounter a room full of caged gorillas who seem very unhappy and seem to be vaguely associated with the experiments happening in this place. We also see some information on some terminals regarding subjects who underwent a stem cell exchange trial. This may or may not be the gorillas being monitored, but by the end of the story we will learn exactly how these stem cell samples were acquired. Before too long, Vatic does gain access to the patient records room, and he finds a file on the Winter Ice team, but the info on all the military personnel is classified. As for Vatic and Jane, Vatic is listed as being incarcerated, suggesting further that it was done legally, and Jane is listed as having been killed in action. Upon seeing this, Vatic begins having another super intense flashback. Returning to 6 months ago, the Winter Ice team has just arrived at the pipeline. They're losing contact with home base due to weather, and John is still wondering if his presence is really even necessary. Jane tries to assure him that it is, and that Grienko may have created something dangerous, but just then she successfully predicts an ambush just as JC gets shot. It's okay though, he's fine. As the Winter Ice team approaches the station, Jane ends up running off on her own, and instead of sending any of the well-trained military personnel at his disposal, the Colonel decides to send John to go after her. Now I feel like it would have made a little more sense for Vatic to go after Jane on his own without having been ordered, as the next bit gets a little bit messy in terms of how it works with the story and what's actually happening. So John catches up to her, and as Jane is trying to explain to him that she saw something, Vatic exclaims that the room is about to explode, and Jane seems surprised that Vatic knows this. Vatic then pushes her down a conveniently placed hole leading to the lower floor, saving both of their lives. So this definitely seems like the moment when Jane is supposed to die, and Vatic wouldn't despite having been ordered to go follow her. It's also kind of weird that Jane is surprised by Vatic knowing about the explosion, as if he'd had a vision or some influence from the future, when incarcerated Vatic in the future is clearly having memory issues about these events in the past. This portion of the chapter is supposed to suggest to the audience that Vatic has some ability to change the past. It's revealed by the end of the game that that's not quite what's happening, so in light of that, it's a little weird that Vatic would predict the explosion and subsequently not believe in psychic phenomena. So this is the best way I can still make sense of it all. First, the room was very visibly dangerous to be in, having big red barrels lying around, so the possibility of an explosion wasn't exactly a secret. Perhaps Jane was just so distracted by and fixated on what she saw that she just didn't notice the danger. Also, perhaps Vatic's influence from the future may have been in the form of a vague daydream, prompting a greater concern for her safety, motivating him to act quickly to save her upon seeing the obvious danger. So, without this influence, the alternative events may have been that Vatic would see the danger and instinctively flee before the explosion, causing Jane to die and him to survive. So, I wouldn't call any of this a plot hole, but as I said, it's a bit weird and messy making sense of it. Regardless, Jane tries to explain that she ran off because she thought she saw a child, and John just needs to trust her. And actually, if we take a close look while we're chasing Jane, we can catch a glimpse of this child. So now, with the way behind Vatic and Jane demolished and their radios cut off from the rest of the team, they venture further into the station. Once inside, Jane encounters the body of someone who had been tortured to death, and using her mystic powers, she learns that his killers were also looking for Grienko, and were probably the ones who ambushed Winter Ice, and were still here. The two sneak by / knock out / kill a bunch of soldiers, and in doing so encounter another soldier's corpse, on whom Jane uses her mystic powers again, which gives her a password to access a report on a nearby terminal. This report talks about Grienko and how he often makes visits to the station requesting to contact US authorities, and that his presence at the station often makes the soldiers uncomfortable. It further mentions that Grienko most recently left a child at the station related to his research and requested a medical examination for him. Afterwards, the men at the station started getting sick and having nightmares. The last thing the report says is where to find Grienko, which is in the village of Dobrensk, just north of the pipeline. At this perfectly timed moment, the Colonel reaches out to the two over radio on an unsecure channel. They arrange for the team to meet up on the ground floor to exchange info, and at this moment, more soldiers attack. While Vatic and Jane are fighting their way out, they encounter JC, who escorts them to the rest of the squad. When we get outside, everyone is wondering who it was that attacked them, and Tex speculates that it was some guerrilla force. The Colonel gets the squad moving to Dobrinsk, and Vadic's vision ends, returning him to the future present. Back at the Osiris Medical Facility, Vadic comes to with a headache and upon re-examining the terminal with patient records, finds that Jane is no longer listed as dead, but rather as incarcerated. Confused by this, Vadic delves deeper into her records to find that she's listed as a delusional schizophrenic, held in Penfold Asylum. Vadic then flees to the lower access in the basement level, and when confronted with a new obstacle, he learns that he can emit an invisible projection of himself to better interact with things out of reach. Further into this level, Vadic finds himself surrounded by guards, and again, words seem to fail him, so instead, he explodes with a new alternate usage of his Psi Blast. Along the way, we also hear by eavesdropping on another set of guards that Vadic is being referred to again as some kind of killer. He then makes it to what seems to be some parking area and finds a conveniently and irresponsibly accessible car. Maybe it's even his car, I don't know, but he uses it to make his escape towards Jane. At this point, we get a brief cutscene showing the real antagonist, whose name we don't know yet. He's looking over some patient files for a Project Zinner as he gets a call regarding Vadic's escape, which clearly makes him unhappy. We then jump right over to Penfold Asylum and are briefly shown that Jane is here. We see Vadic climbing a wall to break in, and he's gotten nice new civilian clothes since the medical facility, showing us his third and final form. He gets into the building without too much trouble, and just after doing so, he begins having another power explosion. This time, however, it's unprovoked, and when an orderly goes to investigate the ruckus that's being made, he gets the privilege of witnessing how much more easily Vadic can toss people around with his telekinesis. This little event largely goes unnoticed, and just afterwards, Vadic starts coming upon some doctors doing research and tending to patients. He decides to take advantage of his anonymity here to converse with some of these doctors to find Jane and get his bearings. Or maybe he doesn't. This is one area that's got a good chunk of information lying around that I may have overlooked or failed to piece together. For instance, there are admission records for Jane saying she's traumatized and delusional about her precognition. There's files on other patients, as well as general psychology information, some of which might even lightly suggest that Vadic himself is delusional about this whole situation. I'm not sure that's the case, I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, we encounter plenty of other patients as well, many of which are understandably being forcibly treated, so this is a very serious asylum. And a couple of times along the way, Vadic experiences a brief, weird connection with Jane, and there's not really much more to say about that. Before too long, he finds her in her cell, and she's terrified of everything and clearly not herself. She's also obsessing over a pocket watch, which we learn a little more about later, but it's not super important. They begin their escape, and Vadic finds he needs to utilize his charm ability to keep Jane calm and focused. They fight across rooftops, encounter a patient who's fairly friendly, and escape to the sewers beneath the asylum. Once they're down there, Jane regains some awareness, likely as the medications given to her are wearing off. So John takes this opportunity to start asking her about the men who are chasing them and what happened to the Colonel. She says she doesn't recall any details regarding the people pursuing them. However, regarding the Colonel, she says, "He's dead, Vadic! You were there!" And this, of course, triggers another one of Vadic's flashbacks. Returning back to the past present, Vadic and the Colonel are camped out talking about Jane's significance and how she once stopped a nuclear bomb. So she's probably not wrong when she says that Vadic is important. At this point in their conversation, Vadic notices something, and it turns out they're being ambushed again. After the initial wave, Vadic tells the Colonel that he sees it, referring to a projection of a child, again, which means at some point off-screen, Vadic would have told him about the glimpse he caught when Jane almost died. The Colonel doesn't see it, but he agrees that they should follow it, as they need to secure the area anyway. The pair encounter some buildings that are connected to the pipeline project, and it's occupied by hostiles, so the Colonel tells Vadic to find a way in. Vadic gets inside no problem, and soon overhears a guard discussing over a radio what the men are doing here. They're apparently on their way to a rail depot, and they're stopping here to rest for the night. Vadic radios Stark to let him know that the men here will be leaving by morning, so they can't wait till the next day for the Winter Ice team to help them investigate. So, in light of this, Stark tells Vadic to knock everyone out using his tranquilizer and explore the area. Vadic begins doing so, and soon comes upon an office with some information telling him that the research base in Dobrinsk is tied to a corporation called USHC, which is the Hydrocarb Corporation, and that this fact is supposed to be a secret. Vatic and Stark soon meet up, and when they do, Vatic mentions the rail depot to the north, which is what the soldiers have been using to ship personnel and goods. After opening a gate blocking the road to the north, Vatic again sees the child's projection. This time, it possesses Stark, and through him asks Vatic to save Debrinsk, their village, then compels Stark to charge forward along the road briefly. Stark soon snaps out of it, and Vatic informs him that they're following the child, which they continue to do up to and through the rail depot. There seems to be some kind of theme with holes in floors of rooms and saving people's lives, as after the two have traveled in the rail depot for a bit, they encounter such a room, and it's full of USHC equipment. When Stark moves in to investigate, he's ambushed and captured. The child that they've been following then appears to Vatic to speak to him directly, and the subtitles inform us that his name is Peter. He informs Vatic that he can save Debrinsk and all of the children using his psychic powers, of which Vatic is still skeptical. The child then unlocks Vatic's true potential, Elder Guru style, granting him all the powers we've had access to up until this point in the game, as well as an upgrade to his projection, allowing him to possess people as we've seen Peter do. From this point onward, Vatic's skepticism, or lack thereof, isn't ever really mentioned again. Returning to the crisis at hand, this must have been the moment the Colonel was supposed to die, and again, it's not exactly clear how and why things would have been different. Perhaps again the best way to explain it is just as a heightened sense of urgency. So Vatic uses his newfound powers to save Stark, who afterwards notices that the equipment the soldiers have been using come from US Special Forces, not from Russia. After this, we cut back to Penfold Asylum in the future, just after Vatic and Jane's escape. We see our antagonist pull up and speak to an officer, and the one notable thing he says is that he doesn't intend to take Vatic and Jane alive. Also, regarding the affiliation of the non-Russian officers that are involved in this whole mess, that'll all get ironed out around the same time we learn the antagonist's identity. Returning to future Vatic in the tunnels beneath Penfold, this whole segment with Vatic and Jane escaping from these sewers is pretty much just that. Jane is more alert and no longer needs to be calmed, and they navigate complex tunnels escaping various pursuers. Once they've escaped the tunnels, they stop to discuss Vatic's flashbacks and how events keep changing after they happen. Not much more is said about it, but to Vatic's surprise, Jane does say that the Colonel is now alive and that they do need to find him. According to her, he was court-martialed in a bid to cover the events of Project Winter Ice, but he disappeared before he could be arrested. She says she was given an address to find him in Queens, and they drive there in what seems to be the car from the Osiris Medical Facility, so I guess nobody's looking for it yet. They arrive in Queens, maybe within a block of the address they're looking for, and they quickly learn that they aren't the only ones looking for Stark. It's here we start seeing agents who work with the NSE, or National Security Executive. And from my understanding, the NSE is directly and secretly tied to the USHC Corporation, but we'll delve more into how the NSE ties into everything here in a minute. Vatic has Jane circle the block while he goes to look for Stark on his own, avoiding NSE agents who are all bad-mouthing the Colonel. In his exploration, Vatic encounters a group called the Vipers who seem to be able to help find Stark, and they send him on a delivery to gain their trust, because no matter how you do it, saving one of their members is never good enough. So Vatic goes to deliver his package of tulips, and he's given a friendly Viper tattoo as a reward. He brandishes his new tattoo to his prospective friends, just in time to protect them from an ambush, after which they point Vatic in Stark's direction. Vatic climbs up to Stark's apartment to find that Stark is absent, and finds the Colonel has been looking over files for Project Zinner. The Colonel then appears, sneaking up on John before recognizing him, and when he does, he's rather surprised to see John, as he thought John had died with the rest of the Winter Ice team. When asked to elaborate, Stark says, "The Winter Ice team is dead. They killed him. They killed them all, John." You were there. Vatic again flashes back to his Winter Ice days, this time taking us to when the team first arrived at Debrinsk, and, as usual, we also start off getting ambushed. Once the area is clear, Stark points out a building on a hill that seems to have communications equipment, and sends Vatic, JC, and Cortelli to that building to hopefully utilize that equipment as theirs has taken damage. The three defend the building for a while and get the equipment working, but most of the frequencies are filled with static, so Cortelli sends Vatic back to Stark to inform him to use a specific frequency. John gets back to Stark, delivers the info, and communications are established, and the team begins to follow some railroad tracks through town. They find a way to and through the base to learn that enemy soldiers are all killing civilians, who are getting defiant because they learn that all the research is being shipped out of Debrinsk, about which we'll get more details later. The team clears the outside area of the base, and when moving through a tunnel to get to the inner area of it, another skirmish begins. Jane has some kind of vision, and ominously suggests that this is when the Winter Ice team would die if Vatic doesn't go join that fight. Once more, it's not really clear how things could have been different to cause the Winter Ice team to die. I still stand by the idea of a heightened sense of urgency. Although at this point in the story, Vatic in the past may be gaining some awareness that he is altering the future in some way. And again, not unlike with the Colonel ordering Vatic to go look for Jane, it's a little weird and clunky that Jane had to have a vision to prompt Vatic to go help. Once the dust settles, the team starts tending to an injured civilian they've encountered, and Stark decides to call for an evac. I think he's prompted by the extent of the civilian casualties and it's causing concern for the team. But as it turns out, all of their comms are being jammed, hence the limited frequencies previously. And Jane subsequently says that they can't leave now, they're so close, and the flashback ends. Back in Stark's apartment, in the future, Stark immediately confirms that the Winter Ice members are now alive, but were used as scapegoats to cover Project Zinner, hence the questionable legality behind Vatic and Jane's incarcerations. This is also where we officially learn that Project Zinner is the research into the psychic phenomena present in the children in Dubransk. Stark also reveals the real antagonist's name, which is Hansen, and he's the director of tactical weapons research for the National Security Executive, the NSE. Hansen was also present in Dubransk during the experiments, which partially explains the US involvement in Russia, and is now experimenting in the States for, of course, weapons development, based on Grienko's research. The apartment building is then suddenly surrounded by agents, and Stark gives Vatic all of his notes on Project Zinner, telling him to go to the NSE agency building, probably to just attack it and stop the problem at its heart. I'm not entirely sure what the plan is, but they both start shooting their way out. John makes it out of the apartments while Stark stays behind to give him cover, and when arriving at the car, Vatic sees that Jane has been taken by NSE agents, who are clearly not following orders not to take either of them alive. We're then taken straight to the NSE agency building, with Vatic confidently approaching the front desk, introducing himself and asking to see Director Hansen. When the guard pulls up Vatic's file, John quickly uses his psychic powers to pistol whip him, and starts looking for Jane. During Vatic's search, he comes to find that apparently movie night is a big deal at the agency building, maybe even a little out of control. He takes advantage of this when he encounters a video relevant to Project Zinner he wants to watch. He copies it over to a UVD and takes it over to the big screen. This video really only shows that super psychic soldiers are being developed by the NSC and being deployed worldwide. Upon seeing this, Vatic decides to use his flashback power, which is his first time actively trying to use it, and he's also not trying to change anything, he's trying to remember what happened with Hansen and Grienko back in Dubransk. This returns us right to where we left off in Dubransk with the injured civilian. She tells the team that the soldiers are killing the children, so the children are frightened and might be a danger to Winter Ice, except for Vatic, who she says is like the children. The civilian then seems to die, but doesn't, as she hands her not very important pocket watch over to Jane. And that's it, that's the entire fable of the pocket watch. After having been told that the village church leads to the underground facility where Grienko is, Vatic decides to embrace his destiny and search the village for the church key. We see that most of the buildings in the residential area are pretty much empty, and it really seems like the soldiers are packing up everything that's not nailed down. In one building, there's a note that suggests that this isn't the first time Dubransk has been disturbed by the outside world, and that people have left the village as a result, which could possibly hint at Vatic's ancestry, but there could be more lore here that I failed to locate. Vatic manages to find the church key, and then subsequently locates and disables the jammer that the enemy soldiers have been using to disrupt communications. Or Vatic might not disrupt the jammer. It doesn't really matter, but it is how we learn the civilian's name, Dr. Baranikov, and that she isn't really dead. When Vatic arrives at the church, we encounter the initial results of the Zinner project, psionic super soldiers who have been sent to stop him. It's also at this point in the game that if we fail the mission, we see a cutscene of Vatic being admitted to the Osiris medical facility with no memory from having already been drugged. He's in the interrogation room that we've seen once or twice before, having a conversation with Hansen, bringing us full circle to the beginning of the game. Between this cutscene and the shaved head appearance of the super soldiers we've now seen, we can pretty easily tell that Hansen is wanting to turn Vatic into one of these soldiers. Anyway, assuming all this doesn't happen, Vatic does reach the elevator to the underground facility in the church, and we get a cutscene showing Hansen and our first look of Grienko. Hansen is receiving word of Vadic's presence and subsequently tells Grienko to pack up all of his notes for them to leave. Then on the side, he orders his men to kill Grienko when he has everything together. Returning to Vadic just under the church, he's in a section of the facility that seems abandoned and powered down. He manages to restore power and then encounters one of the children, Anna, who tells Vadic there are 4 other escaped children to find, just as soldiers appear to sweep the area for Vadic and the rogue children like Anna. In Vadic's exploration, he locates a terminal showing that Hansen's men have been tracking the Winter Ice team for some time, with orders not to engage, so they really must not like obeying Hansen's orders, what with all the ambushes we've seen. Soon after, Vadic finds 2 of the children, Tanya and Ivan, who are under fire, but they really don't seem to need to worry about bullets, and he rescues them so they can go hide with Anna. After this, we next encounter a familiar face, Peter, who's also being attacked, and he's angrily fighting back and needs to be calmed down with Vadic's charm ability after he's been rescued. Peter then informs Vadic that his best bet of finding the last child, Nadja, is to find her projection and to follow it. Around this time, if we look around, we can find the various cells in which the children were kept, each one showing a chart detailing the children's various quirks and power specialties. For example, Peter was particularly talented with telekinesis, but had a bit of a temper, and the other children would on occasion need to calm him down with a charm ability, much like Vadic just did. Vadic soon manages to track down Nadja's projection and follows it to where she's hiding. When asked about Grienko, she says nothing and wordlessly leads Vadic to him. Also, as an interesting side note, we find down here a strangely familiar-looking interrogation room, which is obviously Hansen's idea. The pair then reaches Grienko's room, and Nadja speaks up to ask Vadic not to harm him. Vadic goes inside to meet Grienko, who pretty soon starts going on about why the Xener project is going over to US soil and oversight. It's all because of funding, which I found to be a hilariously grounded explanation. Grienko simply can't come up with the funds to do his research, and Hansen over at the NSE has the kind of money Grienko needs. The flashback ends here, returning us to the NSE theater room in the present future, and the building is on high alert as Vadic continues pushing towards Hansen. Going up an elevator to the upper floors, Vadic encounters some chambers where psychic soldiers are being created. These soldiers each awaken, and Vadic proves to them why firearms are still helpful to those with superpowers. We then briefly see a cutscene of Hansen being informed of this development, and unsurprised, he says he'll be waiting for Vadic in his office. At this point, an NSE agent peacefully approaches Vadic and invites him to said office. Once inside, Hansen explains to Vadic that the Winter Ice team was a scapegoat for all the killings that he had ordered in Dubransk, which is why people keep going on about Vadic being a psycho killer. He goes on to say that Vadic's escape from the Osiris medical facility was all planned for him as a test for him becoming a super soldier. Hansen further states that the Xener experiments have progressed to the point where they're nationwide and they can't be stopped even if he's killed. Vadic starts to attack Hansen, who then reveals he has Jane as a hostage. When released, Hansen says, "You can't change the past." To which Vadic responds, "You're wrong, Hansen." This prompts one final flashback from Vadic, during which we hear from off-screen a gunshot and a scream, signaling Jane's untimely end. Again. We return to the same moment from which we left talking to Grienko, and Vadic quickly tells him that Hansen isn't taking the children with him, he's just taking samples and then killing them. This immediately makes it more clear that Vadic is more strongly retaining his future memory. Grienko is very quick to believe Vadic, mostly because he recognizes that Vadic also has powers, and tells him where to find Hansen, confirming that despite his love for his research, he truly cares for the children. Just then, a psychic soldier walks in and unceremoniously guns down Grienko while Vadic watches. Then Vadic decides to fight back. Vadic then hears from Anna saying that Hansen had found where they're hiding and he needs to hurry. And while moving onward, he encounters another scientist who he may or may not do a better job of saving than he did with Grienko. Deeper into the facility, Vadic encounters and is helped by another child, who seems to have some kind of physical abnormalities going on. He won't be the last like this, and it's not really clear if these abnormalities were caused by Project Xener, but probably. After having helped Vadic progress through a door, the child runs off. Soon afterwards, Vadic starts having erratic shifts in his visions through the future and the past, first with Vadic watching himself in the Osiris Medical Facility interrogation room, which he recognizes. We also see echoes of certain future events, including scenes we would have seen if failing certain missions. And when Vadic catches up to the echo of himself in the medical bed where he woke up at the beginning of the game, Echo Vadic addresses real Vadic for an exposition dump. Echo Vatic tells himself that what he's seeing here isn't in the present, it's a possible future, and that he's still in Dobrinsk. As these hiccups continue to happen, Jane's voice chimes in saying that the children are why Vatic is a part of Winter Ice, as they've been showing him events that might occur in the future. Vatic still continues descending the facility in between episodes, and on his final episode, it's thoroughly spelled out that everything from the Osiris medical facility onward happens in the future, not in the present, and is experienced through a final power, precognition, rather than Vatic using some other power to change the past, though my wording up to this point may have spoiled that fact. After all of this, Vatic finally makes it to the lower levels for his final, or initial, confrontation with Hansen. Hansen is here, hiding behind a wall of glass that he believes is psi-proof, while Vatic needs to fend off soldiers while attempting to free the children. As the children are released, they help Vatic clear out the soldiers, and when finished, they prove that Hansen's glass is only psi-resistant at best. Once Hansen is exposed, a group of those deformed children surround Hansen and start to eat him, I guess? That's all we really get about these extra abnormal children. I would almost guess that they're just in the story to give Hansen a particularly grisly end. After this, we see Jane, Stark, and Vatic all being extracted as a secondary team secures the area as they fly off into the sunset. And that's it. No epilogue showing how things may have changed or what becomes of the children, so we can assume the best. Also, if you're hoping for any kind of post-credits cutscene, you're instead treated to infinitely looping credits. And that's it for the story of Second Sight. I would maybe say that it ends rather suddenly, but I found it to be a rather enjoyable road to go down, and I hope everyone enjoyed my summary. Thank you all for watching.